So I'm Sarah. I manage a team of UX writers at Atlassian for our tech team's products. And in the last year, we've started partnering with our design systems team, the lovely Alex and Tony, who I'll shout out tonight. And we've been working with them on a few shared things. So writing guidelines, glossaries, and of course, per tonight's theme, on terminology decisions. So in this talk, I'm going to walk through what a terminology decision actually encompasses. We have 3 great talks on this topic, so hopefully you learn heaps about it. I'm going to talk also about how you can help validate some of those decisions, and then walk through a process that we've started at Atlassian, and hopefully it's something that you can adapt for your own teams. Okay, to kick us off with some big, bold letters. So terminology decisions cover pretty much any naming choice. It's totally up to you. Typically within design systems, it's regarding elements, components, pattern names. The things my teams are probably a bit more concerned on in the product side are things like menu names, nav items, and then massive new product concepts, so everything in between. The terminology decision itself obviously depends on the scope of the thing that you're naming. So a menu item in a feature that's not super heavily used probably can be just a simple process. Something, if you're renaming a massive concept that has really high brand association, is used everywhere, that's something where you're going to want to take a step back and actually go through what I'm going to talk about today. So why do we even need this process? Back in the day, before Atlassian even spoke the words design and system in one phrase, and when we were a much smaller team, we pretty much made a lot of these decisions in isolation. So we would end up, we didn't have elements per se at the time, but if we did, a lot of them were probably sharing names when they shouldn't have, and we had concepts that had names that didn't really work for all use cases. It doesn't seem like a huge deal, but I'll go through a few of the problems we ran into. Probably the biggest one is product complexity. Now, Atlassian has quite a range of tools, and many of them are renowned for their complexity, which is something we're fixing, so don't worry about it. But by introducing even small word inconsistencies, words that didn't make sense, we were actually introducing complexity for our users. So that act of kind of pausing because you're not sure what a word means, all of those little pauses add up. So I'll walk you through an example. This is our chat tool, Stride. And you can see there's this concept of saving something in the sidebar. So you can star a room or a person that you're chatting with, and then it ends up in this starred list, which pretty much bookmarks it to the top. We have another product, Confluence, which is our collaboration tool. Originally, they had a similar concept, and they called it favorites. So you could favorite something and then remove that thing from the favorite list. We actually recently, about a year ago, probably not that recent, renamed this to saved for later. So icons stayed the same, it's all stayed the same, still a similar concept, just a new phrase at this point. So it seems maybe somewhat innocent. However, if you are a user, even just within Confluence, you've already had this complexity introduced with something that should be a fairly intuitive task. Same thing if you're using Stride and Confluence together. You see the same icon, no idea if it works the same. It's just these little things that add to product complexity. Second thing is lack of context. So growing companies, software companies, it's all quite fast-moving environment, but it's very likely that the person who made the original decision might not be on that team anymore, they've moved companies, or that thing is just documented in their head. A lot of times conversations about these terms can occur over email threads, PRs, lost in a comment on a page somewhere. It's very hard to track them down. The problem is if another team comes in and wants to do a similar feature that's kind of like this bookmarking thing, and they're like, oh, bookmarking, nailed it, that's what I'm going to call it. They don't have the context of whether that word was maybe discussed in the past and it didn't work for XYZ, and they don't know why, because our product teams are a bit spread out, they don't know why Stride is using star, Confluence, save for later, that kind of thing. So you've actually ended up, if they were to go ahead with that, and shipped now 4 concepts, names for the same thing to our customers. And the last thing that you can see there is, of course, just internal confusion. So our poor designers, writers, PMs, everyone, if we don't have this shared language about terminology decisions and how they should be made, you end up in a lot of just roundabout conversations. The thing with star and save for later, we had a team come in and they wanted to look at whether they should rename this concept of watching, which is where you kind of watch something and get notifications. So we were looking at whether we should make that consistent with this star functionality. And we were talking about it as if they were both the same thing. Probably had a few too many conversations about it, but it turns out they are two different concepts, like divide them. Don't try to clump it together. So it's not all dour. If we look at terminology decisions as basically a type of pattern, you'll see how they fit really quite nicely in design systems. So these are the 5 benefits I will walk you through. First up, removing subjectivity. So I'm going to do a super impromptu survey. So that action I described before, where you're saving something for later, anything, whatever, how many of you prefer the word star? Do a little hand raise. Oh. How many of you prefer the word favorite? What about bookmark? What if you hate all of those words? Awesome. So you'll notice in that really academic research we just led that even in that small moment, you've already started to form an attachment to a word, or you hate all of them, or you don't care. It doesn't really matter. The problem is when we form attachments to words, it can be very difficult to separate yourself from that word. And this doesn't just happen with writers. This is like everyone in the room just decides they like something. We all have opinions on what the best way of doing something is, what the best component is to use, how much white space should be on this slide. That's design guidelines. That's where these guidelines really come into play. So I love this guy, John Sato, is an amazing UX writer. He blogs a lot on Medium. I definitely recommend giving him a follow. But his quote really aligns with what we're trying to do with terminology decision processes. So we're not saying like strip all the personality away and write like a robot. No, like still use your preference and your ideas and all of that passion to craft a bunch of different options. It's just when you edit with your head, that's when the guidelines help guide you to what the right decision is. At the end of the day, we don't want to design and write for ourselves, even if we are customers of our own products. We want to write for all of our customers. Second thing, so a lot of design systems, like I think this is kind of the tagline for design systems, or has been quite recently, is ensuring consistency. As my team's been working with Alex and Tony's in the last year, I've been finding myself mentioning this, like we have to do this because it's consistent argument a lot. And I think it's a good argument. However, sometimes I feel like I'm reaching for a bit more. It can be hard to chat with a PM and say, hey, I need dev time and design resources because you're using a wrong word. Like, it just doesn't quite work if you just say it needs to be consistent. So what we found is using an argument more like this. So inconsistent terminology can actually increase change aversion and increase cognitive load in your products. And another way of thinking about this is often if you have a mobile and a desktop version of your app, you try to reduce cognitive load by making those experiences quite seamless. The same thing goes for terminology decisions. So you don't want to be that user in a version of Confluence or in Stride who sees this little star thing is like, yep, cool, got it, I don't need to think about it, and then they switch to something else and it's favorite or save for later or bookmark, whoever knows what. So reducing those cognitive loads is just a really great way of making sure users are actually reaching that aha moment, which is another fun catchphrase of the last year, and just achieving goals that they need to achieve with your product. Another one that's helpful having these processes embedded with design systems is informing information architecture, or IA. If creating great UX begins with consistency, then that should also inform the way that we build and structure our products. So here's a fun map. Going back to my American roots here, everyone. So a product IA is basically like a subway map, for better or for worse, if this was a great example. But basically lets people know where to go, how to get there, best way to get there, and all of that fun stuff. If we build and define the concepts in our IA with an effective terminology process, we are actually creating something that people can find easy to use. So an example that Tony and I were talking about the other day is with settings. So we define settings, this isn't going to be a very specific definition, but we define it as something that contains only internal items. So my notification settings, things that I can control as a user, permissions, that kind of thing. Something that we consider external might be something like a team dashboard, a list of reports, that should not live in settings. So we can tell people that because we've set up that definition as part of our terminology process. And so bread and butter for all the content people in the room is obviously maintaining voice and tone. If we embed terminology decisions within a design system, we can help make sure that all of our products, brand assets, websites, everything is adhering to our brand personality. So at Atlassian, our brand personality is bold, optimistic, and practical with a wink. And we have a writing style and a set of writing guidelines that helps us adhere to that. Because what does bold actually mean? So having those writing guidelines in place actually makes sure that when we're reviewing a term such as bookmark or star or favorite, we can actually compare it against the writing guidelines we have in place. Maybe favorite doesn't quite have that wink factor that we're looking for to add in our products. We speak about wink probably too much. And then last one for design systems, this is another one that I think they're quite known for and that I've definitely learned to appreciate in the last year working with them, but of course helping teams work faster. So we ultimately do want teams to create harmonious experiences, and we want them to do so as quickly as possible. If we have the definitions documented, if we do have this terminology in place, we can help reduce some of those roundabout conversations that we were talking about earlier, where it's like, you were talking about star, I was favoriting, watching, just kind of cut out some of that stuff. You have the decision documented, you have past conversations documented, it's all good to go. I really liked this quote from Aryan, who's a product designer, also a great Medium blog person. But if we don't have that shared language, that's when we often have a lot of those roundabout conversations. Speaking the same language means we can move more quickly and we can get on our way towards shipping great experiences. So, the process part, how do we actually do this? So this is kind of a very simplified, lovely, presentable summary of what we do at Atlassian. Basically, in our current state, we came across a few decisions and conversations that kept coming up again and again and again. It was like, okay, we need to create a framework for this and actually put it in a system that we can use over and over. So here are kind of the main 5 steps, which I will break down in just a minute. I'll let you take a picture. Cool. So first one. This is the most important. So this is pretty much setting the stage for the entire situation. With terminology decisions, it's not like the newest growth experiment or a feature or something. If you're asking a team to invest time and money in a terminology decision and then in shipping changes for that decision, you need to have a super darn clear problem statement and also a definition of what the impact of that problem is. So for the star example, the lovely star example, we pulled a few quotes like this from our Atlassian community, which is where people can go comment and go wild and ask each other questions. So when we introduced that save for later change after it was called favorites, we got a lot of comments where it was like, what is this? What does this change? The word doesn't actually illustrate what I'm trying to do. It was madness. Obviously, this is just a few comments. Not everyone hated the term. And there's another piece here about change of version where did we onboard users properly to the new term? And that's definitely a separate conversation, which I'm definitely happy to have after this. But for that initiative, we made sure, this is kind of a hacky capture of our problem statement, we made sure that the problem statement captured the impact of terminology decisions, since we didn't actually have a process in place, and the need to put all of these words into some type of definition and choose one. So from there, that's when we can actually get the right people involved. And make sure you get the right people involved early. So with something like star, save for later, whatever 50 other terms we had going, the actual feature concept was probably only used in 3 products at the time. Explicitly, you could star something in that product. However, we had quite a few other teams looking at doing something similar. So we actually had this lovely list, name dropping a bunch of people. There's probably one that doesn't actually exist, if you'll notice that. But so we pulled in writers from nearly every single product team, even if they didn't have any idea of what the heck this star thing was doing, just to make sure that they could be that single representative of their product's view and their product's audience. At the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that we hadn't left out, half of what could potentially be our audience, even if they didn't know or care about this concept at the time. So obviously this list would be quite fluid, but it's just good to consider it early on in the process. Now, a lot of feedback we also got at this stage is just, if I'm the one building this feature, designing this feature, why can't I just name it? which is great for that person, but that's not really the point of design systems. So gently, if you do work in a design system team, you probably will need to rehash that design systems are here to keep us consistent and all of those 5 benefits that I'll talk about in the end. So from there, this is where you actually go into defining scope. So things to think about here are you going to look at the entire platform and suite and everything that this term is used in? Are you just going to focus on one product for XYZ reasons? This is where you need to make it very clear and illustrate to people what you're doing and why. So we use the DAISY format. It stands for driver, approver, contributor, and informed. It's nothing crazy new. We just took it from someone that knew what they were doing. And we create a bit of a table like this on our pages. This is obviously from after the fact. But it's just like a one-stop shop on a page. We use Confluence to document this, and it lets you see what's happening, why are we doing this, what's the deadline, who can I contact, just make it very clear. Basically, the more friction that you can remove from stakeholders and what, we're all busy, we're all doing stuff that's important. So the more friction you can remove, the faster these types of decisions can be made. Okay, so this is my favorite part because this is like our jobs as writers. So auditing and investigating. We've broken this down into 3 phases. It doesn't need to happen like 1, 2, 3. They can happen at different times or concurrently, whatever it is. But first, I do recommend starting with this. So don't just jump straight into user research because it's like, I have 2 ideas and I need to test them. Like, let's take a step back and actually look at what's happening in the product. So with the star example, we did a very fancy designer-friendly situation like this, where we threw everything in this big table and got stakeholders to actually have some authority and ownership and drop usages from their own products there. Every bit of detail is welcome here. So if you're working with people on this, don't hesitate to add everything, even if it seems a bit silly at the time. So we'll have people add, so in the case of star, okay, Stride uses star, you can do this. This is what happens when you click it. This is the list where the starred things live. Everything is there in one place. This is also where, before you jump to stage 2, you should start actually coming up with definitions for those words. If you don't have alignment at this stage, it's going to be very difficult to then go and user test stuff and come to a decision because people are going to have all of the attachments to words and all of that fun stuff. So next up is a bit of a competitor analysis. We didn't do for that star decision. I don't think it's necessarily needed, though. Again, every word choice is different. This doesn't need to be something crazy. It does not need to be super in-depth, like let's product marketing research all of our competitors. It's really just to help level set. Are you on the right track? Are there words that you're not thinking of? Is there some industry standard that you shouldn't be messing with? So obviously ours is very detailed, but we just did a very summary view for the star, save for later view. And we actually found that one of our competitors, Asana, used star, which was a nice validation for us because at this point we were kind of moving in that direction. And we also found that other tools were using a mix of things, which was kind of okay because yes, bookmark and favorite are industry standards, but we also found that a lot of competitors and people who'd been around for ages were actually moving away from them because they were maybe more legacy or outdated terms, just in this use case. So from there, we can go into a bit of user testing. For the star and save later or whatever bookmark example, we didn't actually do user testing. And the only reason for that is because we had so much internal data available to us, and we actually had a lot of people who were involved in the original decisions there. So we could pick their brains. Confluence had heaps of research that they used for their 2 word choice decisions. And that made us feel confident enough that with the support data, stuff like NPS data, whatever it was, that we could actually make an informed decision amongst ourselves. That being said, we do user test a lot of our other words. So whether it's something way more complex, if the team just cannot get alignment, there could be a number of factors. But these are the 3 tests that we use. And I'll just blow through them really quickly. So preference test, you just chuck a user 5 words, ask them to put them in preference order. Fill in the blank, you'll describe a thing, a task, and then take out the word that you obviously are looking to test and have people fill it in. Concept tests, I'll just kind of throw up an outline of what we're using for one of our Jira features. This is where you can get a bit fun, so you can start throwing people into prototypes or screens and just take out the menu name or the thing that you're testing and then ask people to describe what they've seen, ask people to fill in the menu items, and get a lot of insights from there. The one thing to remember with user testing, which is not special to terminology decisions, that's everywhere, is just because something user tests well does not mean it's the right choice. Obviously, if something user tests the worst, like maybe you want to question it, but if the thing that wins out, if there is a winning term, wins, there's still some internal thought that you should have. So last step for this is a big table of pros and cons. We open this up for voting, as you can see, kind of squeezed in there on the right. And it's not something we always do, as I'm sure a lot of writers and designers and anyone who likes to have accountability and ownership of their work would tell you the reason we opened up voting for a word like star, save for later, bookmark, is just because this was our first go at having a terminology choice. So we didn't kind of want to swoop in and say, like, we're taking control and we're making this decision. Like, it just probably wouldn't be a very good way of making collaborative friends at work. So we opened this up, got people to drop some votes, did a pro and con list, and then came up with our final decision, which was, if you couldn't tell from how many times I dropped it, was star. Sorry for everyone who hated it, but we got it. So at this step, there's a few things to remember. First is, of course, documenting. So make it very clear what stage the decision is in, why that decision was made, just again, that DAISY form that we showed before, and where people can go if they do have any questions about it. So document, document, document. If you have a shared glossary, or if you don't, maybe now's a good time to start one, publish the word and its definition to that glossary. So here's a little snippet of our star definition. So the reason that we did go with this, just for a bit of background so you can hopefully trust us, is we needed a word that would be really good as a noun, verb, and adjective. So we really wanted the action to be the same as the thing where that action is going, and then to describe that thing. So you star something, it goes into a starred list, and then you can view your starred items and then unstar them. Beautiful. We also wanted something that could be easily scalable across all of our products and across web and mobile. So with starring, we felt it made a lot of sense to star a comment. Bookmarking a comment didn't quite work. Favoriting does work, but then we also wanted you to be able to favorite an entire project or space. And then the other thing that went into this decision was, of course, our voice and tone guidelines. So we do want to have a bit of that delight. Also, practicality-wise, we already had the star icon that was very heavily used, so it just made sense. Also in this definition, you'll notice that this, which is very important, because people will continue to search for these terms, like in 10 years when, heaven forbid, if we're not at Atlassian, someone wants to know what went behind this decision, they can see that, yes, we considered these things, and we said no because of X, Y, Z. So for publishing purposes, this is our glossary. So now this is where I'm going to veer off in the last few seconds. You'll notice I didn't leave a lot of time for it because this is our gray area. So we have not figured this out yet. Let's talk about it after. Let's figure it out together. Go team. So for publishing, we did not publish our final decision for this term to our glossary because we actually need to have a conversation about what term should live in a glossary. There are heaps of terminology decisions happening at all of our different teams, so we're not quite sure yet if it makes sense to publish all of them in a glossary, which could become like a 1,000-page situation. That being said, again, that first documentation step is where it's really critical. So we do have a decision register that people can search through. This is just one open question that we have. The third list thing here that you'll notice is the releasing part. That's a really hard part. So we have released technically this term to new features that are being built, and obviously our lovely tool Stride had it already in place. However, if you are a Confluence user, you will notice that it is still called Save for Later, which is something that we're working on. So we think we've nailed this terminology process. We're now trying to figure out how to work with teams to actually figure out how terminology decisions should be prioritized in people's roadmaps and when they should actually ship this thing live. And that's pretty much it. So I'll give you one more summary slide. So for anyone that has thoughts about terminology and whatnot, just remember these main 5 benefits. So removing subjectivity and making decisions objectively, ensuring consistency across all of your platform and product features, maintaining your lovely voice and tone guidelines if you have them, or creating them so you do, informing the product IA so you know how to structure things and what terms should own things and all of that really fun nitty-gritty stuff. And then, of course, helping teams work faster. That's it.